to see everyone here today. Let's start off with a word of prayer. Almighty Creator, I thank you, Lord, for this opportunity to glorify you. I ask you to please send your Spirit with me, that ultimately you will be glorified and there will be nothing from myself. I thank you, and please continually send your Spirit with each of us. In Jesus' precious name, amen. So as I mentioned last time, this is the second one of a series that I was doing. I originally got it from Amazing Discoveries, and I kind of tweaked it a tiny bit. Used all their information because it's actually really great information. But I myself really got a blessing from the series that they did, and I asked them for permission and everything, and they're like, "Oh yeah, no problem, go ahead." So, anyways. It's, of course, about evolution versus creation. And I'll do a little bit of a recap of the first one. So the first one was talking about basically how was everything created. And those of you were here, you'd already remember. But if you weren't here, then I'll just do that recap. Basically talking about the Big Bang and the Big Bang theory and how it... how everything came into existence. And of course, according to their own scientific literature, this is the basic understanding of how the Big Bang theory started, right? The universe burst into something from absolutely nothing, zero, nada, and as it got bigger, it became filled with even more stuff that came from absolutely nowhere. How is this possible? And then they go on to ask this gentleman here who he talks about his theory on inflation. And we cited many different documents that talked about this, but basically, according to evolution, everything came from nothing. And we go on, and of course, so we also talked a little bit about Charles Darwin and about his book on the origin of species, and how of course, we look at how when he describes it as, man is getting better, humanity is improving through death, right? The weaker species, the weaker genetics are the ones that are the animals are passing away, dying from that, and therefore the stronger are then surviving. But of course, Romans chapter 5 talks about it from a different point of view. Wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. And of course, the creation view of it is, originally there was no death, but then now that there is sin, death has come into the picture. And so that's kind of the different, huge differences between the two. But of course, with things like the Big Bang, they can't recreate that, and there was no one there to observe it. And of course, when you actually look at what they say, it actually really is faith to believe it. And that's kind of what it comes down to. And even Francis Crick, which one of the gentlemen I'd quoted, a biologist, he said, biologists must continually keep in mind that that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved. And which makes, when you look at it, it looks so complicated, and how it works together, this looks like it's been created. This has been something that has been designed intentionally. But he's like, no, you can't actually, they have to continually remind themselves that no, you don't actually, it wasn't designed, but it evolved into this. And so that's by actually an atheist, but that's what their quotes, right? And they got the quote down there. I think it's interesting how the reality is it comes down to both systems are based on faith, right? And that was kind of what the first of this series was based on the belief system and how everything started. And of course, we look at the way creation looks at it, and we look to God, and we look at the biblical account and the way how everything came into existence. But no one was technically there to observe it, nor can we recreate it. And it's the same argument for both sides, which means they're both on the same belief system, which is faith. So, I wanted to move on now in this series and talk about this that was, as Jesse had kindly came up and read for us. One man who states his case first seems right until the other comes and examines him. And so, this is basically going to be talking about what evolutionists or scientists would say. This is our hard and proof that we've evolved, and the Earth has been around for millions and millions of years, billions actually. And so that's kind of what what this series, this particular one is about. But what's interesting is we go on, and according to their own scientific documents, we actually find out that a lot of things that they've actually been teaching in science books have actually been lies, and they've been doing it for like 90 years. And it's been proven wrong, but they still will choose to do it. And it's really interesting that they would still choose to, knowing that it's wrong, but they'll still bring it forward as truth. You know, and this kind of reminds me, one time I'm just going to share a little story with you. This was a long time ago, 20 plus years ago, and I was called to jury duty. Has anyone ever been called to jury duty? A couple of you? Yeah, okay. Apparently, if you don't go, it's actually considered breaking the law. Anyway, I got called, and I was young. I was like 23, 24, and I thought this was actually really interesting. This is kind of neat. I find that kind of system interesting. I was actually be able to be part of it. And so, of course, we went through the whole series of the way they choose, and I actually got chose to be on one of the jurors, on one of the groups that would be debating cases, right? And okay, great. So we came back, and they even gave us a little stipend for traveling in. I was like, woohoo, this is great. I get actually paid, you know, to come in here and sit down and listen to people share their part of the story. And so we got started, and we came into the courtroom, and we were sitting, of course, all off to the side, and the two cases, or the two people that came in one was pressing charges against, of course, the other, and one of them was hobbling along on a cane. Apparently, the case, he had broken his leg, and of course, it was because of the other gentleman. And so, this was what the court case was about. And they called the prosecution up first, and so he went up and basically gave his side of the story. Okay, gave his side of the story, and I'll give you a really quick synopsis of it. It was basically, these gentlemen were it was a gathering, there was a big party going on. Of course, alcohol was a factor. That's where problems really started to get bad, right? But, so these two gentlemen were having an argument, and in the argument, he was getting pretty heated, and I guess one had decided he was going to leave, and he got in his car, and then the other one, who was the one who was pressing the charges, was in front of the car, and apparently during the argument, the gentleman in the car had put the vehicle in drive and tried to drive away, and ended up and pinned the gentleman up against something and broke his leg. And therefore, when after that happened, then he started to pound on the car's hood, and basically the police were called and all that stuff, and then that's one half of the story. Real quick on it. And I thought, well, that seems pretty logical. You know, somebody was, heated of the argument. They wanted to, use their vehicle as a weapon. And interesting. Okay, no problem. Doesn't seem that complicated. Let's just see what the defense has to say, because that seems pretty reasonable, right? People having arguments, and someone trying to use their vehicle because they're really, you don't necessarily focus, you don't necessarily keep your wits about you when you're arguing, especially when alcohol is a factor. So anyways, the defense gets up and goes to tell his case to the jury. And as he's telling the case, he basically has all the same details. Everything was the same, pretty much, but in a different order. That's what I thought was interesting. And so he said, well, we had an argument. I got in my car. I was getting ready to leave. And then the person who had pressed the charges, who had broken his leg, who was on the outside of the vehicle, had started pounding on his car in the moment. And he said it dented this part of the car, and that's part of the evidence. And so he ended up and wanted to get his vehicle out of there, so he put in drive and tried to get away, and that's when he hit the gentleman. And comes down to, I'll be honest, the court, that case, because one of the jurors actually knew one of the police officers that was involved, it actually got thrown out. Or it went back through the process again to get a new. And actually, that's all I know about. I don't know nothing more than that, other than the fact that somebody wasn't telling the truth. Somebody was lying. Same information, different series, but in each story, the story was slanted to make that person look like they were the victim, right? And it's in order to try and persuade other people, right? You follow me? And I'll be honest, we're all guilty of that, right? Whenever I hear a story, I know there's at least two sides to it. Sometimes there's three sides, right? There's one person's view, there's the other person's view, and then there's the truth, which is somewhere in the middle. But anyway, it really struck me and realized that, as even in court, when people are, putting their hands on Bibles and swear to tell the truth, they're still lying, right? They have their best intentions forward, so you would think, and they don't tell the truth. And that's kind of what really surprised me about, not surprised, I guess it's kind of obvious, but when I go on about with some of these details, we can learn, and they're not all about people willingly choosing to lie about things, but there's definitely, the point I want to bring out with, according to this verse, is he who states his case first seems right until the other comes and examines him. And when you get the whole picture, then it looks, oh, I get a lot more color to this picture, to this painting. And so let's start into the evolution part of it. How old are the continents? This is what the question is asked, and according to evolutionists, the continents are about 2.5 billion years old. And we'll get a little bit more information as we go on, and you can see where it's cited there. This is according to the evolutionist view on how old the continents are. Now, and one thing that happens that's regardless, and we've all seen this, is erosion, okay? Now, we all know what erosion is, right? Whenever water comes down, or wind, and apparently erosion can happen underwater. But this is just the example of erosion, how it just washes away. As long as we have gravity and we have movement, things are going to always be making their way down. And so that's one of the kind of things I wanted to just touch on here for the continents. And so this is, again, a scientific journal. And the average height reduction, so meaning things are getting brought down, okay, for all the continents of the world is about 60 millimeters, okay? It's about 2.5 inches, just under 2.4 inches per 1,000 years, okay? And this is something that they're able to measure and to look at, and which equals to about 24 billion tons of settlement each year. And so now you can see, if we figure out, okay, if the continents are how many billions of years old was it? 2.5 billion? Go back here, what does it say? It was 2.5 billion. Okay, now there's all of a sudden a number to it, right? So the problem has been highlighted by a number of geologists who calculate that North America should have been leveled in 10 million years if everything was basically going at the same erosion rate as it is today. And so mathematically, 2.5 billion, wait a minute, we'd all be a completely flat surface if it was only 10 million years. So I mean, even their own math isn't actually lining up. Now granted, they will use the argument and say, oh, well, that's because the continents are moving upwards. Okay, I get it. All right, I get it. That's what we do know there's tectonic movement for sure. But according to even their own, they noticed that there is definitely some holes in their theories. So this is a very rough scale, okay? Very rough scale of timelines, from a creation timeline and an evolution timeline. And I just wanted to kind of just put this up here just to explain, and so you can see that it's really the vast difference between everything, right? In the beginning, 6,000 years created, and of course evolution teaches the Big Bang was between 14 to 20 billion years ago. That's when everything came from nothing, no energy, no time, no space, and it just happened. And then from creation, about 4,400 years, this is approximate, okay? The flood happened, and then 2,000 years ago, we have Jesus Christ came, saved the planet, the human race, laying down his life for us. And then, of course, we have modern day, and this is approximate 6,000 years, okay? And, of course, evolution starts at that 14 to 20 billion and goes up, and about 4.6 billion was the planet came to existence, and then about 3 million years ago, humans started coming around. Now, that's kind of the overall synopsis between the two, okay? And some people might make the argument, well, can't you believe in the Bible and, believe that, we evolved? And I'll be honest, there's just huge gaps between the two. To do that, to believe that, you literally have to ignore some really obvious differences in the belief systems, right? And so that's the two. Now, I want to get into one of these examples in Denver, Colorado. Okay, now there's this interesting building there that they have, and it's the U.S. National Ice Core Laboratory, okay? Now, what it is they store ice cores there, all right? And what an ice core, if you ever used a hole saw before, you drill a hole, but you're still left with the middle part. Well, it's the same thing with these ice cores. And they went to Greenland, okay, and they drilled all these holes. And which, by the way, I was looking a little bit deeper into it, and I found out that the ice core in Greenland is about 3 kilometers thick at its deepest point, okay? And so they took these ice cores, and they pulled these ice cores out, and then they started analyzing them and looking at them and saying, okay, let's try and figure out what we can see. And so I'm going to be quite honest with you, they started seeing what they call annual rings, okay? Now, I'll be honest, those actually aren't the real rings. They were just drawn in there just to kind of get an idea. You have to actually look at it very closely with the light behind it and stuff like that. And what you'll actually see, so by the way, there's 135,000 annual rings, at least, in the deepest hole, okay? The deepest hole that they drilled with this ice core. They took these ice cores out, they brought them back to the States, they store them, they analyze them, they study them. And there's 135,000 annual rings, kind of like when you look at a tree. You count the rings? Well, that's what they're equivalenting this to. And they're saying that every line equals a year. That's their argument, okay? And you can kind of see there's just kind of this is the description. You can kind of see it kind of close, how it gets kind of light and then dark. And it's not really easy to see unless you have a light behind it. But essentially, this is their proof. This is, sure, we don't have it for billions of years, but we have it at least for 135,000, right? 135,000 years. The proof's right there, right? So, can you just imagine someone in school, some young person, maybe someone in college, and someone who believes in the Bible, and of course they have maybe a obtuse instructor who likes to point out things like this and says, ha, you might have your faith, and it's only 6,000 years old. Well, yeah, how's this? We know it's at least 135,000 years old. What do you say to that, right? What do you say? Like, what is a person's faith happening at that point? I don't know. Proverbs 18:17, right? One who states his case first seems right until someone else comes along and examines him. So I've told you their argument, okay? Their understanding what those annual rings are. Light, dark, light, dark, light, dark. The light would be winter, and then the dark would be when the snow kind of compressed and melted a little bit, and then that would be a year, right? Summer, winter, summer, winter, summer, winter. That would be one of those. Summer, winter is 1 year, okay? Light, dark. And so that's their argument. But one thing they weren't aware of, has anyone ever heard of the lost quadrant of World War II. I know there's been a couple. It's actually fairly well known in Christian circles, but it's just such a huge, it completely blows the theory out of the water. But everyone see that, this? Yeah, I know, it's really great. It's, this is those kind of proofs that God makes sure that we get provided, so we get the counter argument for these kinds of things. So what happens is basically, this is an old World War II plane, and if you notice, the background is very white, and people are all dressed in, heavy clothing. Well, they're actually, so the story goes, back in 1942, these planes were going, and apparently they ended up, and there was two squadrons actually came together and met up in the top corner over there, and they were going to fly over here to Great Britain, and on their way they ran into a bunch of fog, and they couldn't see where they were going, and it was really bad. They didn't have the same instruments that we have nowadays, of course, so they ended up and turned around, came back, and of course they were the fear of running out of fuel, so they actually ended up and landed on the big ice sheet. They landed on this big ice sheet, and we're like, okay, well, they ended up in radioing, and they got rescued. But for some reason, they left their planes there. And I don't know all the details, other than I went through the article. Probably something to do with it would have cost more to bring fuel into it to get them out, because there was quite a few of these planes. But regardless, they left the planes there until 1992. Somebody decided, you know what? I want to get one of those planes. It's been documented that these planes are in this location. The military has it clearly documented. So what did they do? They went up there, they went to that same location, and there was nothing there. Apparently there was a tower that was supposed to be there that they parked near, and that tower was gone too. They're like, okay, what's the deal here? So they started searching. Well, they ended up and did find them. They had to use ground penetrating radar, okay? To be able to go down and to be able to try and see if they could find these planes. And not only did they move physically a different location, like I think it was a couple of kilometers away, but it was under 75 meters of snow, 250 feet, in 48 years. Now, I believe it was, when I had read the article, it had said 50 years, it was 92, from 42 to 92, so regardless, it was either 48 or 50 years. It depends on, I guess, probably when they started to go to it, started to make plans to go and get these planes. So they decided, all right, let's go up. They ended up and tunneled down. Once they found with these ground penetrating radar, they ended up and tunneled down to where these planes were. And of course, they said, well, this is great. We found what the planes. They ended up and started taking the planes apart, piece by piece, and they brought it. And they actually ended up and got one of those planes back to North America. They ended up and got it running, and it flew again. Crazy. True story. You can find it for yourself. But what was really interesting is as they were, by the way, 75 meters in 48 years, 75 meters of snow on top of these planes. That in itself is a huge, makes things quite question, okay, wait a minute. Anyways, they had a creationist came and was actually there while they were doing it, and he came and asked them as the guys were going down, and he said, so how many annual rings would you say, can you count, right? There should be 48 of them, or 50. There should be that many, right? Because that's 1 year, white, light, dark. And he asked, no, he said, he didn't say, he just asked how many there were, and he said, oh, there's several hundreds of them. And he's like, several hundreds annual rings? But how can that be? There's only 48 years. He's like, oh, those aren't annual rings. Those are simply warm, cold, warm, cold, warm, cold. You can get some of those in a day. You can get several of those in a day. And all of a sudden, oh, wait a minute. Now things are starting to, you get the other half of the story, right? I mean, have everyone seen this? You go on the side of the road. What do you see? I know in the zoo, they oftentimes will get rid of the snowbanks, and they'll take the snowbank and they'll cut the snowbank right in half. And then you see all these lines, right? And so, oh, wait a minute. Once he's been cross-examined, wait a minute, now it actually jives with Christianity a little bit closer now. There's a reason why it's so many, because that's just how many hot and cold spells there were, which could happen as many in a day, or this is 1 year, and you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different layers that were just to hear it in the side of the field, beside the road. So one man seems right until he's examined by another. And that's why these kinds of things really build and strengthen one's faith. Well, so we go from 135,000 years to maybe a couple thousand years, right? Not to mention, if you do the math, in 48 years, if it collected 75 meters of snow, you can extrapolate and see to get that amount of snow. If it was continuing to snow at the same rate, that would, to get 3 kilometers, the depth, that would only be 2,000 years. All of a sudden, things don't line up as well, right? It's just something to be aware of. There's always 2 sides to every story. All right, how about stalactites, right? By the way, so that's a good example of a good observation from a scientist, a good observation, but a bad conclusion, right? And so here's another one, stalactites. New Mexico's unfinished symphony, and they talk about how they have these stalactites, right? Stalactites are from the top and stalagmites are from the bottom. And of course, what it is actually moisture in the ground that's above it, dissolves some of the minerals, and as it slowly comes down to the tip and then drips off, it leaves a little wee bit of minerals there, which of course it gets a little bit longer. And of course they can extrapolate and say, oh, well, if it's traveled this far from, it's gotten this long, well, then it must have taken, you know, if it takes an inch to travel 1,000, or you can get an inch of growth in 1,000 years. Okay, well then you can then extrapolate, right? You can then predict and say, okay, well from the ceiling down, it must be this old. Now, that's using the same, the analogy, that's using the same theory though, that everything has always worked the same, and it has always been the same amount of water. Humidity, moisture, which is what dissolves the minerals, right? Of course, in New Mexico, oftentimes you go to deserts and they'll say, oh, that one time this used to be the ocean bottom, right? And science will say that even. I know you can go up on mountains and find fossils of little creatures up on mountains. And so we know that to say that it's growing at the same rate as it is now, that's kind of a flaw, because you know that there would have been more moisture in the past, because as Christians, what do we believe in? A flood. And a flood, what's that be? A whole lot more water, which would have dissolved a whole lot more minerals. This is the Lincoln Memorial, which was built in 1922. This picture was taken in the 60s. Oh, look at the length of those. Here's a bat. You can kind of see the bat's kind of drooped over. One of the stalagmites, the ones that are coming up from the bottom, looks like it's growing from the bottom, but literally it's being dripped on from the top. And they call it flow stone when it's highly concentrated in the minerals, when it drips down, and it completely covered the bat. But it still has the shape of the bat. So how many years do you think it took for that bat to decay? I think it took thousands of years for that bat to simply decay, or did it get covered relatively quickly? And in order for that to shape like that. These are the kind of things, when you hear the other side of the story, it makes, oh, this actually does line up with creation. Things like these are what evolutionists, Bernard, don't like to share. That's the other half of the story. This one here in Thermopolis, Wyoming, by the way, you can see there's somebody standing right there. This was actually back 100 years ago. Somebody had seen this water bubbling, the flow stone kind of bubbling up the ground. They took a pipe and they stuck it in the ground. Water started filling up, and then it started to bubble over it. 100 years later, that's how big you have, right? It just kind of gives you an example. Every location's different. That flow stone these kinds of formations can grow and happen at all kinds of different rates, where evolutions will teach, well, it takes thousands and maybe millions of years to be able to accumulate those stalactites. Everyone following me? It's just like one of these things that there is definitely another side to the story. Okay? How about this? How about fossilization? Here's a fossil of a tree, and it's got a nice wedge out of it. Evolution teaches that metal wasn't even invented for, I think it was, actually, Brian, you'd probably be better versed in that. Was it about 4,000 years ago-ish? For metal, to be about that. You know what I mean? And so they would say that getting a fossil takes, millions of years before it to happen. Well, clearly it's happening in shorter times. How about this one? This one you can actually go and visit. There's actually a dog. There's a better picture, I'll show that next. But a dog that's been fossilized inside of a walnut tree. I believe it was a walnut tree. It's next slide here. And you can see, you got the number you can call. You can actually go and see there's a dog fossilized. It was they believe it to be a 4-year-old hound found 20 feet up in this hollow chestnut tree. And you can actually go and see it. I've watched videos online of it. And so do you think that dog is millions of years old? It kind of starts to put a whole new perspective on things that, maybe it's not, I'm not saying that nothing is old, but I'm just saying that this is, doesn't mean everything is old, that's for sure. How about the everyone, I've heard somebody say something here. Is anyone familiar with this guy? How do you pronounce it? Piltdown Man. Okay. This gentleman here, the year is actually 1912. I don't know if you can see that, but this is what the Darwin's theory is proven right, proven true. It's been proven. We've found the missing link. That's what they always like to call it, the missing link, right? Which is the link between humans today to half a monkey, or a monkey that's somewhere in between that, right? And of course, that's what the argument is. We came from monkeys and we evolved into what we are today. And so this is an article back then that was written. And actually, does anyone want to read it for me? Anyone at all?
Skull found in Sussex establishes human descent from apes. Thought to be a woman's bones, illustrate a stage of evolution which has only been imagined before. Creature could not talk, probably lived in a time when other species of human had developed further elsewhere.
Isn't that interesting? From bones, you can tell whether or not it could talk. As a young child, I can, looking at things like the History Channel or the Discovery Channel, things like that, and they would talk about all this stuff, and you would see these, people that would be talking about things like this, and you used to think, wow, these people have like godlike wisdom to be able to look into the past and to be able to make that kind of prediction or that kind of statement to say it's proven. Right? As if there's no doubt at all. No doubt that it actually has proven. Okay. Proverbs right. One man states his case, first seems right, until the other comes and examines him. Right? The great Piltdown hoax. For 40 years, and it's kind of cut off here, but for 40 years, this hoax was going on. And you can imagine that 40 years, how many people would have lost their faith during that time? Saying, oh, it's been proven. Okay? Actually, got to get another volunteer. It helps keep people awake, especially when it's hot. Would anyone mind reading this? This is according to the Evolution Handbook. Anyway, point being, it was 40 years. You imagine somebody in that time frame living that during that time and seeing this and their faith being lost when it was literally somebody, like I said, probably trying to gain popularity and establish himself in the scientific world, but in reality, he was flying. He found a skull, took a ape skull, filed them, a little bit more to make them fit together. It was a hoax. It was a lie. It was a flat-out lie to try and for self-motivation, right? To self-gain. It's just those things that we have to be aware of. And of course, to somebody who doesn't know the whole story, it can really push your faith down, right? How about Haeckel's embryos? Now, as we go on, some people may be familiar with these. So, Ernest Haeckel, there's a year, he actually lived at the same time that Charles Darwin lived. And he was a biologist. And he ended up and drew these pictures, right? He was studying them and he drew them, and of course they didn't have the photocopies of pictures back then, and so that he ended up and drew them. And he's like, and so it's going this way, by the way. It's going this way. You can see over here this fish, and then there's, tortoise and chick, and humans are over here, and a rabbit, and he shows that all in the beginning. See how in the beginning they all look very similar. Because they all look very similar, well then that proves we all came from the same lower lives. And we evolved over time, and then eventually end up and are very much distinct afterwards. But they're saying because we started off at all looking basically the same, well then that's proof that we all came from the same embryos at some point in the time, okay? Remember, this is in the 1800s. And can you imagine what somebody would be saying? Somebody's faith would be challenged to see that. Like, look at, man, those pictures are amazing. Wow, maybe the Bible isn't so true. Because if Darwin's theory is proven true, well, then that actually proves contrary to what the Bible teaches, right? In fact, Charles Darwin at that time actually made a statement, right? Somebody want to read this one for me, please? And so even Charles Darwin is like, wow, that's really compelling information. But I bring this verse up again. The one who states his case first seems right until someone comes along and cross-examines him. By the way, so this is actually the drawings that Haeckel had drawn, right? The biologist had drawn these. This is actually what they are. This is his drawing up here, and this is actually what they are here. Now, some of them maybe, that one has a bit of a C-like shape, which kind of looks similar, but the rest, they really don't look anything alike at all. He literally fabricated the whole thing, right? He literally made drawings to, and that should have been the first clue, right? He drew them. These ones here are photos. The point being that when you look further into it, and I'll be honest, a lot of scientists don't even take that. They take it for granted that, oh, the person before me, if it's written in a textbook, well, then you got to believe it. That's what we'll build on that and go further. But when what's written in the textbook isn't right, what do? Well, you're starting off on a foundation that's flawed, right? And this is the scientific New Science in September of '97, and it's actually talking about the fraud that actually this guy did. And he goes on, and here's the rest of the article. Can I have a volunteer as well?
Set of 19th century drawings which appear in reference books are badly withdrawn, says the embryologist has written, although Haeckel confessed the drawings were not written because of fraud, even if they now. Drawings persist.
That was one quote. This is another quote as well from a different source. Would you mind?
Purely by genetic law, it is dead as a doornail. It was finally exercised in biology textbooks in the 50s, at the top of a serious theoretical inquiry in which deep in the 20s.
Even their own scientists say that he lied. He broke the law. But what's interesting is they said they got rid of it in the 50s. Great, right? They got rid of it. Okay, good. Here's 94. They're still trying to make the same comparisons over on that side. See in the beginning how they all these similarities? This is textbooks that, by the way, we would read as students. It was in the US, so it's probably Probably wouldn't be the same ones that we would have read, but I can remember seeing stuff similar to this when I was in school. And you can see it's still there. They didn't get rid of it at all. Here it is again. They're starting, and they're trying to make the same comparisons again. It's different pictures, but they're trying to make the same comparisons that we started from this same basic life form, which then evolved into the different things. And so it's just a classic example. And here's Stephen Jay Gould. He said that the Haeckel's drawings was the academic equivalency of murder. You know, and I guess that's my point I just wanted to bring. The Bible has such wisdom in it. And I'm going to wrap things up here, Rick, shortly. But such wisdom in the sense that you don't ever want to come to conclusions by only hearing half the story. I can just imagine on these things here that evolutions will use this, say, oh, hey, we've proven that this is what it's like. But in reality, when it's looked at closer from another person who's being non-biased, they can see that, no, there's actually huge holes in it. And that's one of the things I can really appreciate about, for every argument that an evolutionist makes, there is another argument that a creation makes, right? That is equally believable. It's out there, but you got to take the initiative to go and find it. Or, actually, to be honest, sometimes they're hard to find. Like to find some of the things that were proven hoax. A lot of times you don't even get introduced to those until you're at the higher levels, even above like university levels. After more further in-depth studies, it's just things that you need to be aware of to build your faith. Look at the whole story. Anyway, that was my presentation for today, and I hope it really inspired you. I know it really inspired me when I was listening, when I first had to listen to this message, and the rest of the series really is full of this kind of really great information as well.